So it's time to be able to shoot the enemies. In the ships class, let's create a getShipCoordinate function that only returns the coordinate, and then another public list generic shipBeam function that will return the beams, since the ship is taking care of the beams. We just return another call to the beam class itself, where we also create a public getBeams function that will return a list of shipBeam objects. Return beams. Okay, perfect. Back to the ship class. Return beams.getBeams. Okay, using generics, of course. All right, and the getShipCoordinates should return a chord entity and nothing else. Okay, now let's add another entity, enemy entity. Okay, the constructor will take a chord entity, a coordinate, and then also a boolean, which would be isDestroyed. And then we create two properties, a coordinate, and then also an isDestroyed property. Right, okay, and there we go. Okay, and then we of course set them in the constructor. Okay, perfect. Now we have an enemy entity. Okay, let's get back to the enemy base class, and here we create another function, getCoordinate, and that returns the coordinate. Okay, now in the enemies class we need a public function, isDestroyed, that returns this new enemy entity. The isDestroyed function will take a beam coordinate. So the idea is that we return the coordinate for an enemy and also the boolean that tells us if it was destroyed or not. Okay, in this function we need a coordinate and a temporary enemy entity, and the boolean isDestroyed, which will be the return value in the enemy entity. Let's set it to false initially. Then we need a list of beams. No, let's do that later. So for each enemy in enemies, since we are in the enemies class, we will get the coordinate of the current enemy. And now let's compare that enemy coordinate with the beam coordinates. So for each enemy, we will check with the current beam to see if it's a hit or not. So if beam coordinates x value is greater than or equal to the enemy coordinate x plus 1, since the ship starts with the space, and the beam coordinate x is less than the enemy coordinate x plus 6, since that's the width of the enemy, and the beam coordinate y value needs to be greater or equal to the enemy y value, and finally the beam coordinates y value must be less than the enemy y value plus 2, since the enemy consists of 3 rows. Okay, if that's the case, we have a hit. Then we unplot the enemy, and then we store the enemy, the current enemy, in our temporary variable, and we set the isDestroyed to true, and then we break the loop, since we know that if the current beam has hit one enemy, it will not hit any other ones in this situation. Oh, the temporary variable should be an enemy base. I'm sorry. Okay, and then finally, if the temp variable is not null, then we have a hit. And then we call the enemies, then we just remove that instance from the list in the enemies. And then finally we return a new enemy entity with the coordinate and the is destroyed boolean. Okay, perfect. That should be it. Now, let's go back to the enemy base. In the enemy base, let's add an unplot function. Since the enemies now can be hit, they need to be there needs to be a function that could delete them also. So let's use the for loop from the plot function and just an at line at coordinate x and okay, and the coordinate y plus I. And there, oh, we need to add a string. Just 6 or 7 spaces. Okay, there we go. That's the unplot function. Back to the games class. Now in the game loop, we need to add a function here. Check if enemy is destroyed, if yes, deleted. Okay, let's call it enemy destroyed check. Okay, and then we add that function down here in the private methods. Okay, wait, let's put it after the move function. Move method. Private void enemy destroyed check. Okay. So from here we'll handle the enemy destroyed check. Let's see. Okay, we need an enemy entity instance and then another generic list of ship beam, which we call beams, and then we call the ship get beams. Okay, so if beams, okay, we need to add another using for the generic list. So if the beams count is greater than 0, then let's check if we're actually firing. Then we loop over each beam that is currently firing, and for each beam we need to check if any of them, or we need to check if the current beam is hitting any of the enemies. So we set enemy entity equals enemies is destroyed. Okay, and then we send the beam's coordinates. Okay, let's go to the ship beam and add a function get coordinate that returns a coord entity. We need the coordinate for the current beam, of course, because we want to send it to the enemy function is destroyed to determine if it was a hit. Okay, so if the enemy entity is destroyed is true, then we delete the beam, ship delete beam. Okay, let's go to ship, and in here we will add that function delete beam with a beam, And since the ship holds the ship beams class, we need to send the request to the beams class, and there we will create another delete beam. I'm not sure if that was the best option to let the ship class hold the ship beams class and the beams or not, but that's the way it is implemented for now. And the ship beams class just returns just remove the beam from the beams list. So we delete the instance from that generic list. Okay, so in the game class, in the enemy destroyed check function, let's add here also a beam onPlot call. Okay, that's good. We need another generic list. Let's call it beams to delete. And then in the for each loop, let's just store the current beam that we want to delete in the new beams to delete list. After the for each, we'll loop over the beams to delete list. And okay, let's see. I'm sorry, I need to think a little bit. No, okay, let's delete the for each. Instead, we call the ship class and create a delete beams class. Beams to delete. So let's replace the delete beam function in the ship class with a delete beams class that takes generic list of beams. And then we'll create another one, delete beams in the ship beams class. That also, of course, take a list of beams. We loop over all the beams. Underscore beams dot remove beam. Okay, so let's try it out. Exciting. Okay, here we go. Oh, it actually deletes or destroys the enemy. It works. Perfect. Okay, but I'm still firing. I could only fire 3 times. Okay, let's see. Oh, of course. In the delete beams class, we also need to decrease the number of beams because it had reached a maximum of 3. So let's try again. Perfect. And we delete 2 and 3. 1, 2. Okay, that one missed. Oh, wonderful. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, let's try this now. Let's go to the game class, and then we will disable the enemy move function so we could try it out better. Okay, let's run the application again and move the ship. Okay, it misses. Okay. Okay, perfect. And now one step more, it should be deleted. Perfect. Destroyed. Okay, so on the left side, okay, miss, and there it hits. Perfect. We're done. We can now shoot the enemies.